Mr. Jawando has been a council member for the Montgomery County Council now since December 2018. He, before that, worked with WorkSource Montgomery as a program called the Summer Rise program, which I'm also familiar with because we took on a junior high school student. They take on junior and senior high school students and give them experiences over the summer. And so I had the pleasure also of having one of your students as a summer intern for our program, which was awesome. It's a great thing that you do. And then, so Mr. Jawando has a graduate of Catholic University. He has both his bachelor's in sociology from Catholic and also a JD law degree from Catholic University. And that's kind of like the highlights that I was going to present. And I'd like to turn it over to you and let you just take the floor.
Yeah, and I think I want it to be pretty informal. If there are questions as I'm going, depending on what's in the chat, or if people want to engage, I'd like to leave a lot of time for that. I know we don't have a huge crowd, but we have some people here. So if anyone wants to ask questions while I'm going, and I'll make sure to pause and leave time for that. Obviously this has been a whirlwind of a couple of years, right? I think, I've worked in policy for quite a bit for most of my career. I'm a civil rights lawyer by training, and worked at the NAACP legal department, but I also spent a good amount of time on Capitol Hill. I worked for Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, and worked for Barack Obama when he was a senator, and then in the White House and at his Department of Education, and worked a lot on education and workforce development issues, which is, you mentioned Summer Rise, which is an example of a work-based learning opportunity for our high school students, and on criminal justice and civil rights issues. And so really at the intersection of those issues, and did that in large part because of my upbringing and growth and development here in Montgomery County. I grew up in the county, in the Long Branch area of Silver Spring. And for those who don't know where that is, it's kind of like University Boulevard and Piney Branch. That area, heavily immigrant area. Even when I was growing up, it was heavily African and Central and South American immigrant area, and very low income area, but it kind of a up and coming. It's one of those places where there's a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. And my dad is from Nigeria. That's where Jawando comes from. Came to this country on the heels of the Biafran Civil War in that country, and found his way to Hays, Kansas, which is where my mom was born and raised, and a farm town in the middle of Kansas, and went to Fort Hays State University on a scholarship. And they got together, and I often say, much to the chagrin of everyone there in the mid 70s in the middle of Kansas, people weren't too excited about that interracial relationship. And they moved east and settled after school in the Long Branch area of Silver Spring, in part because of the economic opportunity. There weren't a lot of job opportunities in rural Kansas, and also for more understanding of their relationship. So I often say I've got both sides of the American dream, in that one immigrating here, kind of leaving a violent, volatile situation, which has always been part of the American story. Unless you're indigenous peoples here, right, land was taken away from. And then my mom kind of being internally displaced, looking for work and trying to find economic opportunity, which has always been a part of the American story too. So I've always benefited from that perspective. But I grew up, like I said, here, and I was very early on, I was aware of the inequities in our system and in our area. I had a great time. I live in Montgomery County now. My wife and I have 4 children and love this community, and are going to be here for the long haul. And I've experienced some of the great things about the community, but I've also seen the inequities here and how life can be difficult for many, whether it be cost of living or access to an equitable education, affordable housing, economic opportunity, equal justice under the law, a whole range of issues that we have here, much like the country, right? And so because we're such a microcosm of the nation, with 4 of the top 10 most diverse cities here, and with a large population, we really, I think, see a cross section of all those things that have always been part of the American story. And so that kind of really came to a head for me. I watched downtown Silver Spring develop. I lived in a very poorly maintained apartment for much of my early childhood in Long Branch. And I saw all this new stuff happening in downtown Silver Spring where my mother worked, just a couple miles away. And I started to wonder, well, why is that happening here and not in my neighborhood, right? That was kind of the first inkling of that. And then, unfortunately, when I was a teenager, I lost one of my best friend, my first friend, in an act of gun violence in Briggs Cheney area. And we had gone to the same schools and played on the same basketball teams. And he unfortunately got involved in drugs and dealing and lost his life. And I started to analyze, even at that young age, what were the things that led to those different outcomes. And I started to look into that because you couldn't have told me we weren't the same person. And so I thought about the fact that his mom, single mom, worked 2 jobs, one of which was cleaning houses in Bethesda. She lived in Briggs Cheney. It took her 2.5 hours on the bus to get there and back. And so what did that mean? That meant that when my friend got out of school at 2:40, that she wasn't there, and that she wasn't able to pick him up and help him and make sure he was on task. And there also wasn't a after-school program. There wasn't other wraparound services or supports that could have been there to help fill that gap. And so these are just those 2 examples: transportation infrastructure, being able to get to and from work and we're dealing with that today. I just did a press conference today with some of my colleagues talking about the proposed cuts to WMATA, to Metro and bus rail. Over 19 stations being proposed to close, ending weekend service, shutting down dozens of bus routes. And for the essential workers and people like my friend's mom that have been still working all the way through, this is going to dramatically impact their lives if it's allowed to happen. And hopefully we can get Congress to act and to help backfill this budget. But it's just an example of how transportation inadequacy can lead to serious inequities. You think about, and that's a policy decision, that's a budgetary decision. You think about the after-school program that wasn't there for my friend, a policy, budget decision. You think about the teachers that maybe didn't think he could achieve or were too stressed to give him the attention that he might have needed. Policy, budget decision. You think about the failed war on drugs that has led to disproportionate and many unjustified incarcerations and long sentences, and has ruined lives and hurt abilities to get training and jobs and to provide a quality of life. So inequity in that system that both he and his father had been involved in. And so I started to realize that it wasn't that I was better than him or he was worse than me. There were external factors that neither one of us had control over, at least directly, that led to these disparate outcomes. And so I've really been on a 30-year plus journey of trying to dismantle, understand, and put policies and practices and programs in place to help make those types of outcomes less likely for other people. And it's about really making the promise of America, the promise of Montgomery County, real for everybody. People just want simple things. They want to live in a place that's safe. They want to have a good school to go to. They want to have a job that can pay a living wage, right? They want to be able to retire with dignity. And those are things that have never been equally available to everybody, and oftentimes have aligned with race and class and immigration status, sexuality, or gender, that have denied those or made it more difficult a policy-based way, right? We often forget that the economic system that this country was founded upon and thrived on for more time than this country has been a country is the economic system of chattel slavery that built the wealth that many hold today. And then the enforced system of segregation and discriminatory laws and redlining and practices and the like that exacerbated and reinforced that system. And we're still trying to disentangle those things today. And so that's what I've dedicated my career to, trying to, with a focus in the areas where I have a lot of interest in education, criminal justice, workforce development, but I care about everything, trying to understand and dismantle and put those supports in place. Because the truth of it is when you do this well, when you give people opportunity to achieve their God-given potential, which we all have, it helps everybody. It doesn't just help the individual. It helps the society, it helps the community. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, the mission of a community college, and all this great work that you all do. But that's really what this is about. So there's individual reasons to do it, but there's also societal reasons to do it. And I think, unfortunately, that's we go through these waves in this country where we forget that, and we play the zero-sum game. And we've certainly had a 4 years of that, where if this person succeeds, I don't, or and there's only enough. It's a scarcity model that doesn't exist. Now, certainly, because things have been so unequal for so long, there does need to be some recalibration, right? And people who have been given advantage, that's good for them, and I'm glad they're doing well. But we need to ensure that everyone has opportunity. And so that's going to require the changing in policies that have been in place, reallocation of resources, prioritization. But again, at the end of the day, that's going to help everybody. And so there's so many areas that I could go in deep, and I'll save that for the questions about how to do that. But, I've been working in many of them on the council. I'm on the education committee, education and culture committee. I'm on the planning, housing, and economic development committee. So I've been working really hard on trying to expand resources for our students, for example, and whether it be mental health resources, whether it be removing harm. I'm in a hot debate now around legislation I introduced to remove school resource officers, police officers from schools, and reinvest that money in student supports like mental health and restorative justice training. And so I've also been working on housing, renter protections, and making sure that people have adequate and affordable housing to live in. I've passed legislation to, if a housing unit is deemed unfit for human habitation, it's not kept up, that the landlord has to pay 3 months of rent and the security deposit back so that someone can find somewhere else to live. And it's an example. I've also been pushing really hard. I introduced a temporary rent stabilization bill that passed during COVID so that people can't raise rents when people are struggling to even pay rent. And so I've worked a lot on those issues. And then I've been very active on other criminal justice issues. I passed a landmark use of force bill that outlawed many of the horrific things we saw in the murder of George Floyd, knees to the neck and head, and requiring officers to intervene if they see an officer committing a crime or using excessive force, and then raising the standard of when deadly force can even be used. Most of the country, it's a reasonableness standard. We raised it to necessary as a last resort when other alternatives have been exhausted, such as de-escalation techniques, as creating time and space and distance, and using your words, calling for backup, a whole range of things. So the police chief right now is writing a new use of force policy based on that law that'll need to be implemented. And I've worked with small businesses, trying to support our small minority women-owned businesses. We have 90% of our businesses have less than 50 people, 80% are less than 15 people. So that's really the life's blood of our economy here. And so how do we make sure that they have affordable places to lease and rent if they have a storefront, that they have support? And I know Montgomery College has been great with with incubation and entrepreneurship support? And how do we make sure that businesses have access to capital and the expertise that they need to navigate the regulatory process? So all those things, there's things we need to do more on as well. And certainly protection during COVID. And so I'll end there, and then I'll just maybe, you can prompt me and ask questions. A whole range of things we've had to do during COVID to respond, and this has been, and it continues to be one of the most inequitable pandemics and recoveries that we've ever seen. It has exacerbated and laid bare all of the historic inequities that we've, for a long time, many have swept under the rug or not known that they've existed. And when you look at, any indicator, who's had to work and put themselves at risk, our lowest income, essential frontline workers. The first person to die from COVID was here in the county. Was a ride-on bus employee, 60-year-old African-American man. 1 in 4 of the people who've died are Black in the county. Latino residents have the highest infection rate and concentrated in areas in the county. People who have had to leave the workforce to take care of kids. 80% of the people who stopped looking for work in September were women across the country. 80% of the people who stopped looking for work. And so you go across the line. This has been an inequitable pandemic and multiple pandemics, and the recovery is going to be very difficult. Of the people who lost their jobs in March, April, the first wave, only 30% of African Americans have retained a job again. About 50% of Latinos, 80% of white Americans. So again, the inequity of how this has hit people is going to set us back, if we're not cognizant of it, significantly. So I think now is the time, long past time, to be bold in our proposals and to change the paradigm on what we need to do here locally, statewide, and nationally to address some of these systemic inequities, again, with the goal of helping our whole society. Because when we have productive citizens and residents that can achieve their God-given ability, that helps all of us, and that's what we need. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what I've been doing, and happy to talk about anything more specifically.
Awesome. That's great. And we have had a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, in our chat box, which is wonderful. And one of those is, oh my gosh, actually, there's so many of them. What you're talking about has a lot to do with inequities in the county and things that you observed growing up and that are part of our society that a lot of people are not aware of, because we have this kind of glean that we are a wealthy county where everybody is educated and, all the guys are good looking and all the women are strong, right? But there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of really big problems. And then on top of that, you've added COVID to that. What would you say is kind of immediately like the biggest challenge that you think we're facing as a county that the council can respond to?
Those are always tough questions when you ask, like, what's the biggest challenge?
I know.
Yeah,
What is it?
I think, I think I'll cheat a little bit. I'll say one of them is a mindset challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times people have difficulty holding two truths up at the same time, which is related to what you just said, that we're a great county and we have great opportunity, and we have, we're the 18th wealthiest county in the country last year, right? Median income of $117,000, right? But we also have severe disparities and significant things that we need to work on. So, you have this great stuff going on. We've got all these federal agencies, we've got an educated workforce, we've got access to so many resources, but you also have severe disparities. We're also segregated. Also, half the people arrested last year in this county were Black, even though they represent 18% of the population. If you take Latino and Black residents together, 79% of the people arrested last year were Black or Latino. Same things if who's been pulled over. Black women 4 times more likely to die in childbirth here. You look at who gets hit on our roadways by cars, trucks, and buses. 75% of the people hit this year and killed as pedestrians were Black or Latino in this county because of poor infrastructure in their neighborhoods and no sidewalks and crosswalks. And, so you go down the list. It's one of the reasons I introduced a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, because of all these metrics, and we passed it because you can't address the problem if you don't diagnose it. And that is at the root of so many of our problems and inequities are these systems, these systems that have racism embedded in them. And I'm sure you all are familiar with, individual racism is surely bad and exacerbates things, but that's less important to me. You can call me whatever you want. I just don't want the system itself to produce an inequitable outcome. And to take policing, for example, it's this bad apple discussion versus the system itself. And yes, a bad officer can lead to a very bad outcome, right? But if the system, when I say system, I mean what we track, what we prioritize, what officers are trained on, what they're told to do, what they're rewarded and compensated and promoted on. If you change those things, the system will be inhospitable to an individual racist person. And that's what we have to do. And so and then if there's accountability and transparency, which there should be, all those things working together create the system. And over time, if that system is right, you won't get those types of people. They'll either leave, or they'll be disciplined, or they'll be moved on. And so we have a lot of systems, housing, our economic system in general, that are just set up to advantage some and disadvantage others in a disproportionate way. So I think that mindset, we have to say, yes, Montgomery County's great, but we have some significant challenges. And then the third thing is, but we can be a model about how to be better. I think we also have the tools. We have a $6 billion budget. That's bigger than 4 states, right? We have 1.1 million people, bigger than 9 state populations. We have an opportunity to be an incubator and an example of how to move things in the right direction. And in many areas, we have done that over time. I think we can do it more and more rapidly and more boldly, because, we're not Chicago, we're not Baltimore. Again, progress is possible there too, but we don't have some of the emergency level problems that some people have that can make progress seem almost hard to accomplish. So I think that's an issue, the mindset. And then affordability, I would say, is our, the ability to do the things I said for you, is like the Montgomery County promise, like good school, affordable housing, safe neighborhood, a job that pays a living wage. All that is really at risk. It's not just here, but because we have that high income, things cost more here, right? So, $500 here doesn't go as far as it would go somewhere else. And the cost of if you're a mom, who has kids, and you're trying, and single mom or married, and you work in 2 jobs, and and you don't have a car, and you can't get home in time for your student. You're trying to get professional development yourself. You can't afford childcare, so you have your kid in an unsafe environment. All these things add up, and it just puts so much pressure on people. It really stifles their ability. And I'm sure in the Montgomery College context, you see this, where people just don't have the room to professionally grow and develop. And so anyway, I think that core thing, and there's things we can do here to address it. We have an inequitable, I'll give you one specific example, and then I'll be quiet. Our tax structure. We have a personal income tax here in Montgomery County. Everyone pays 3.2%. So if you're Dan Snyder, who's a billionaire, or if you're Montgomery College student, if you're Matt or Julissa here, I see, hope I pronounced that right, or Clinton, if they have a job, they're paying 3.2% income tax. I think we need to make that a more progressive tax. And I've worked on bills in Annapolis to give us that authority. If we were to raise the income tax on just people making $1 million a year or more in Montgomery County from 3.2% to 3.5%, very small increase, you'd generate over $90 million in revenue a year that you could use to support Montgomery College students, to create those after-school programs, to put more money into affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think our economic system is just fundamentally skewed. It's skewed at the national level too, but there's stuff we can do here.
It sounds like the Montgomery County in a way is like a microcosm for a lot of things that are at the national level. So, I mean, it could be overwhelming, but I think the good light, the shining light, the light that we can shine on that is that we have these incredible students who are extremely passionate and determined to make things better. I think that I know some of these folks personally who are on the call with us tonight are in that place. And across the college. What are some things that that you would recommend that a college student might be able to do at this stage in their life to either get on the trajectory to get themselves in a place where they can address things the way that you are, or that they can do right now that might help make a difference?
That's a great question. I think I didn't know I was going to run for office ever. I actually just started understanding and being involved in policy and activism in college. When I was at Calvin University, I started a chapter of the NAACP there. And I did it because the workers at the school, who were mostly African American, and if you know anything about Calvin University, it's down in the Brookland area of DC, historic African American community, all the food service, janitorial, landscaping, mostly all Black and a few Latino folks doing that. They used to complain to me how they were being treated. And I said, well, I had gone to Howard University and went to the NAACP meeting there. I said, we need this at Catholic. We can advocate for the workers and we can bring a fragmented community of color together. So I'd tried to get the chapter, they denied it. If you Google Will Jawando NAACP, you'll see a 2004 Washington Post article. The first time I was ever in the Post with the headline, Catholic denies NAACP. And we organized and we protested for months over the summer. We got the chapter. And I went to law school there. I was the first year law student and also president of this new chapter. I tell you that long story because through that, I saw the power of like activism and being engaged. So my advice would be pick something that you care about, that you're passionate about, an issue that you've seen, something that you've seen in your own life or life of someone you care about or your community in general, and investigate how to make it better. Small, doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a small thing. And pull that string and you'll start to see the ball of yarn unravel. And it was through that activism that I got my first job in politics at the DC branch president of the NAACP at the time, who supported our protesting efforts. Her day job was she was a senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi. And she said, well, come be a law fellow in our office, in Pelosi's office. And I got an internship and I learned. And then I spent a 10-year career on Capitol Hill, all because I pulled that string. I'm not saying that's how it'll happen to you. You can be more intentional about it. You can come intern in my office. You can engage on a policy issue that the council is doing. But I would just say, investigate the things that have always troubled you and try to make a difference on them. And, we need everyone doing that. It's part of our civic responsibility. Obviously vote, obviously know the issues and the candidates, but try to engage on something that you care about.
I just saying, I love that analogy of pulling the string, because you don't always know where it's going to go, but you know that you're going in the right direction when you do that. That's great. We have an interesting question here about, because of the work that you've done through the universities at Shady Grove. So we hear about a talent pipeline in the county. And I wonder if you can talk to us about, or what you would tell an MC student about the opportunities that you know about regarding like transferring to an institution like USG.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have one of the great things about the county in the gems that we have, not only Montgomery College, but universities of Shady Grove, which is really like the university system, right? You can transfer in and get a 4-year degree from all these great colleges, Eastern Shore and University of Maryland, College Park, go down the list, an array of different disciplines, and do it, for a lot cheaper and also in a way that's probably doesn't require you to travel as much, and can fit into your work schedule. I've spoken many times with a lot of students there, and your diploma is going to say the same thing. And also get workforce work work-based learning experiences. I've spoken to many times to the students there. They have a great, food service and chef program there that Susan runs and other people are involved in, where they have a cool commercial kitchen. You learn these skills, you go out and take, if that's your thing, there's a whole bunch of like ancillary benefits like that. And it's just a great program. And we are actually trying to do more. They just built a great new science building. And you obviously have great resources at Montgomery College as well. And so I think it's an underutilized, and not everyone knows how great of an opportunity it is and how you can make it work into your life. And really, like I said, pull those strings, get interested into and see where the opportunities go from there. So I think, and there's a ton more we can do with the USG model, and we're talking about that, but I think it's a great opportunity for students.
That's great. I actually was just today on the phone with somebody at USG who runs their Entrepreneurship Lab, which is another one of the wonderful things that they
That's
have
right.
there that's available for students if they transfer. Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to invite again, if you have questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat. And this is kind of your chance to ask some questions. One of the other questions that I have, we talked about how students might get involved, and you had mentioned that students could intern at your office, that's another opportunity. How would students get get connected up with those kinds of opportunities?
Yeah, I'll put and if I can't take everybody, but if I can't take you, there's 9 council members, and I'm the coolest, I think, but I don't, I don't tell my colleagues that, but no, we can, there's a lot of great folks doing a lot of great things. We could try to get you in other offices, but I'll put my email in the chat. And you can just email the office if you're interested. We're actually going to be looking for the spring starting in January. So we're doing that now, and then also into the summer. So it'll be an ongoing thing. And we do pay our interns, which is always important. And so that's with that. But even if you can't intern, if you have a question, or if you want to volunteer in some way, or work on something in your own time, just everything is so remote now that even if you had some interest and you wanted to just engage as a constituent, right? If you have a question of the office or something that we're working on, or you have an idea, it doesn't have to be an internship. It could just be you want to engage with the office and share some ideas with us, or get some advice. And I see something said, what are the typical duties? It just depends. We have small offices, so I have about 5 members of my staff in addition to me, and they all cover a range of issues, from education to health and human services to the environment. So normally we assign our interns to work with an individual person based on their interests, and then we bring them all together once a week to talk about issues. So it could be research on a topic or a piece of legislation we're working on or we're proposing. It could be constituent service. Big part of my job is responding. I represent everyone in the county, all 1.1 million people. So when people need something done, or they need to get to us, we have to be responsive. That's a big part of the job, helping people. And a lot of times policy issues come from that, right? You hear about something that is or is not happening. So interns are involved in that work, whether it's writing letters back to constituents, speaking to them on the phone. And then there's ton of events that happen, and conferences and all those things. So it's a good experience. And we try to make sure our interns get a broad range of experience so they can see what they're interested in.
That sounds wonderful. God, all these things, they make me want to go back and be a student again so that I can be an intern and do that.
I know it's a great job. You don't realize how great it is,
Yeah, and to know that you're the part of something that's bigger than you, and that's actually helping. So we're really fortunate. We have 2 of our provosts are on the call with us today, Margaret Latimer and Kim Kelly. And Kim Kelly had a question.
I was interested in the idea of how students can, as students at Montgomery College, how would Mr. Jawando recommend that they pursue their activism and in the issues that matter most to them? And you talked about your personal example at Catholic University, which I thought was a great illustration. And the second part of the question was, what have you seen to be an effective educational preparation for the kind of work you do? And you talked about USG and the college. Is law school the way to go, or do you see multiple avenues for individuals who feel strongly about politics, about activism, about making a difference and changing their local community as you have?
Very good question. I think I got at some of that with the activism. I mean, the main thing is just investigate things that you're passionate about and motivate you, either positively or negatively, right? I talked about my friend being killed, and I investigated the underlying circumstances and pulled those strings and tried to address those systems, and still trying to do that. I'll die trying to do that. I won't, we all we do is make progress, and sometimes you make big progress, but oftentimes things, move, in an incremental way. And sometimes we take steps backwards, right? Depending on the political situation. And so I think, and the experience you need to do that is varied. I'm currently the only lawyer on the council. A lot of times in politics, there are a lot of lawyers, but I'm the only one. And I remind them of that often. But no, I don't think it is required. I went to law school because I wanted to defend people's rights. I thought I wanted to be a defense attorney. And I tried that out as far as like clinics and stuff. And I could have gone that route, a public defender. But I ended up using the policy route as a better route for me. And it certainly helps me in understanding how laws are written and constructed and impacted and what words mean. The technical skills of being a lawyer is certainly helpful, but it's not required. And I think you can, and one of the things you have to, let's be real, the cost of law school has always been expensive. It was very, I was fortunate to get my tuition, most of my tuition paid for through a scholarship, but I still had to pay a little bit of tuition and then room and board. And so I still have law school loans, from that. And that's just something you have to factor in, because unfortunately the jobs where you help people tend not to pay as much. And we need to change that too. We need to pay our teachers more. We need to pay people who are, working in public service, a living wage. It's one of the reasons in Montgomery County, actually county council is one of those jobs where we do better than most. We get paid about $128,000 a year, which is good. It's above the median, right? And so you don't have to have a second job, and I can focus on my constituents and work and address issues. But if you run for a state delegate, which is our state house of, representatives, they get paid like $30,000 a year. And so they all have to have another job, and they're passing laws for the state. So it limits the pool about who can get in. And so there's a lot of those structural things. Again, that's a structurally racist policy, in my view. And so so I would say there's not one background, but do develop an expertise. That's something that I think is helpful. And it doesn't have to be, because be able to be very knowledgeable about one or two things, and then that's going to help you in whatever you do. And don't worry that if you may later in life go another direction, but it's still going to be a good base of support. I focused in on education policy. I worked as a counsel on the Senate Education Committee for 6 years, worked at the Department of Education. That was a big focus for me. I cared about it a lot, but I've come now to work on so many things. And so I will say that's a way too, is develop some expertise, particularly at this point in your life, and then that'll serve you well in whatever you do.
That's great. There actually are two questions that would be good follow-up questions for that. And one of them, thank you, Dr. Latimer, is from Dr. Latimer, who's asking if you can speak a little bit about just what the structure of a county council is. You're an at-large member. Can you kind of explain what that is? And is it a fluid thing, or are they pretty set, like the roles that you have in the council?
I'm glad you asked. I took that for granted. So I am one of 9 council members. There are 5 districts. They go west to east. District 1, Bethesda, Poolsville down to Bethesda on the western side of the county, all the way over to Burtonsville, Briggs Cheney on the eastern side, 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there are 4 at-large members, of which I am one, that represent the whole county, are represented countywide. And that's 9 members. That will change in 2022. On the ballot of this election, there was 2 ballot initiatives, and the one that passed was the one I supported, that increased the size of the county council from 9 to 11. So it by adding 2 district members. So there will now be 7 districts and 4 at large as well. And so it'll go to 11. That'll allow the districts to become smaller. Right now, about 225,000 people are in each district, which is pretty large as far as districts go. So this will bring it down closer to about 165,000 and allow for different, we just had a redistricting commission interviews today. These are the people who are gonna recommend how we change the lines in light of the census in these new districts to make the 7 districts. So that will be done probably sometime mid next year. And then there will be the election for all 11 council seats will happen in 2022, in June 28th of 2022. So I'll be up for election as well, all my colleagues. Some colleagues are term limited. You can serve 3 consecutive terms. So up to 12 years, they're 4-year terms, and then you have to leave. And so 3 of my colleagues are term limited. This is something that was added by a ballot measure several years ago. And so there will be, this time around, there are going to be 5 new council members at a minimum. That's if all my returning colleagues, myself included, run for re-election. And then there'll be 5 spots that are open, 4 district seats and 1 at large. All of them are open, but that will have non-incumbents in them. So we're going to have a pretty significant election in addition to a new governor who's term limited and, other races. So it'll be a big election in a couple of years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That, at least for me, makes those ballot initiatives that we vote for have some significance, because a lot of times we don't really understand what those are, what the impact of those are going to be. So I think that's really helpful. So I've got a squeaky wheel question. She's asked this a couple of times, so we're going to give it to her. She wants to know, I think it's a quick one, if your internships are running remotely at this point. Or is that
Yes,
the plan?
is that Melanie?
Yes.
Yes, very good. So she demonstrated a tactic, the squeaky wheel tactic, but it's more of a persistence thing,
Yes.
and you should do that. And people are busy, people don't see things, or they maybe aren't trying to listen to you. There's a whole range of reasons, but you should be persistent in everything you do. The answer is yes, we're all remote. None of my staff is in the office. We've been remote since March, and we'll continue to do so probably through at least the first half of next year. So yeah, these would be remote internships.
That's great. And the other question that I see up here is from Dr. Tiffany Copeland. She is asking, I think it's a great question, what's next on your political spectrum, or what's the next thing you're ready to challenge?
Yeah, I don't know if that means policy wise or me personally, but I'll give you a brief answer on both. Personally, that's the shorter answer. My goal has always been to have impact and improve people's lives. And I see the public policy as an important tool to do that. Not the only tool. There's many, many tools. Another thing I want you to remember, because there's, just like any profession, there's good, bad, and ugly that you have to deal with in that profession. And not everyone is suited for everything. And, you gotta, if you don't like people talking bad about you, don't get into politics, for example, right? And there's a lot of ways to have impact. But I do think that those of us who understand policy, have an aptitude for engaging with people, don't mind the detractors, you need those people to go into public policy, because it is public service in my mind. There's a lot of I could be making a lot more money doing a lot of other things, but I want to do this because I want to help people. So to the extent that the higher you go up in politics, you can potentially help more people. You get scale. I represent 1 million of the 6 million in Maryland now. Who knows what happens in the future, but my immediate goal is to do that really well. I've been doing that for 2 years. I've got 2 more years in my term. I expect I'll run for re-election, and then we'll see what happens. But one of the things I did learn working for Barack Obama in the Senate, he got elected to the Senate in 2004. When he got elected, he didn't think he was going to be running for president in 2008. I tell you that 100%. And not that I'm doing that anytime soon. I'm just saying that being open to opportunity, not even just in politics, and the timing of things is also very important, because sometimes opportunities will come and they weren't in your 5-year plan, but you got to adjust to take advantage of it. And then I'll just say, so that's a long way of saying I'm likely going to be a council member for the, for the next 2 years, probably next, 2 to 6 years. Then on the policy front, I'm working on a whole range of things. I have 2 bills I'm introducing next week, actually. I'll just mention those and then I'll pause, related to housing affordability. One is a zoning text amendment, which basically is the rules. We have land use authority, which is a huge authority. So we say how high buildings can be, where they can go, what type of use they are, can it residential, commercial. The county council has that authority. And I'm going to introduce a bill that says that in residential zones where you have single family homes, for the most part, within a half a mile of metro stations, that you can build different types of housing, like duplexes and triplexes and quads and smaller and more compact and dense types of housing. Because one of the things we know, that we want to have people near transit so they can access it, and we want to have more density there. Helps the environment, helps people get to and from work, and more housing helps lower the cost of housing. So we need, and different types of housing. We don't just want single family homes and multifamily high-rise studios. We want things that are in the middle that don't cost as much of those things. So it's called missing middle housing, is a term of art. And it's going to be a big controversy. Check the paper on Tuesday, because people that live in some single family homes are not going to want a duplex or triplex or quad built in their neighborhood. But this has been done in other parts, and it's been done in our past too. And many people, if you're born in 30s, 40s, 50s, if you lived in DC, you lived in a duplex, or you lived in 1,000 square feet and there were 6 people there. And it happened in the past. We need to get back to that because it's too expensive. And then the other proposal is a anti-rent gouging bill near transit. And we know that one of the number one reasons that prices go up is for rent is because proximity to transit. And we're already seeing that in the Purple Line, which is thankfully going to be back on track now. Metro, bus rapid transit, rents are going up. And so this would keep those rents within a specified range, within a mile of transit. So I'm introducing both those proposals that are going to, for various reasons, some people will like and other people won't. But I think the affordable housing question is so important. It's such a critical component. 40% of our residents, 35% of our residents are spending more than 40% of their income on housing. And it's a huge barrier for people. So that's something I'm working on now, in addition to the getting the police out of schools bill I introduced last week, and other policing related matters.
That's fantastic. One of the things that I hear as you're talking that I'll just kind of highlight, particularly for the students that we have here, is that you have like an incredible, you've got you've got your facts, right? You know the data, you know the history, and those are the things that you use in order to make decisions, which I think is really it's really impressive. And when we hear you speak, we can understand how those decisions get made in a very thoughtful manner.
I appreciate that. That's important. Yeah. A lot of people don't know the data and the facts, and that harms us. You don't make the right decisions when you don't know it, so.
That's right. Yeah. So is there anything you kind of have given us an insider's view, which I really appreciate. Is there anything else that's happening at the county level that, say, most people don't know about, but you can tell us like what's happening that we need to know?
I'm going to do a twofer. I think, is it Jaleesa? Did I say that right? She's asking about Thrive 2050. Which is something I think most people probably don't know about, but is extremely important. So it answers your question as well. It's our plan. It's our document of it's kind of a master general plan update of what is our county going to look like as far as our transportation infrastructure, our housing policy, or where the stuff I was just talking about zoning authority. What do we want this county to look like in 2050? As far as where people live, how they're getting around, what amenities and things are available to them. And so it's this very large comprehensive plan that the planning department has been working on and is going to be presenting to us. They're going to have their own public hearings here over the winter, and it'll come to us in the spring. And then we will have another set of public hearings, and it has a whole bunch in it. I mean, it's a huge, huge document. So I would just Google Montgomery County Thrive 2050. And yes, and I think I am worried about, awesome, Jaleesa's helping me out here. There are some concerning things in there from my perspective. Anytime you have a big document like that, you want to make sure that, and it's not a law, but it does create a framework from when laws and policies will come under. And there is a push that I don't think is the right push in the county. We just passed a bill and that the county executive actually vetoed, and I didn't support in its entirety, but every 4 years we update the growth and infrastructure policy, which is was formerly called this subdivision staging policy, SSP. No, don't worry about remembering that. But basically it sets what the tax rates are for people who build, developers who build, what they have to pay to support the infrastructure in our schools, school buildings, in our roads, in our walkways, and then the like. This SSP dramatically lowered the amount that these folks need to pay. And the theory of the case was, which underscores much of the theory of the case in the current Thrive 2050, is we need to be more business friendly. We need to be more like Northern Virginia. We need to lower everything so that business will come, and that will give us more tax revenue, and we'll have more buildings, and we'll have more things, and that'll help everybody. For me, it's really a trickle down economics philosophy of that. If you give away everything and have limited or no regulation or costs, associated with the impact, that everything will work itself out. And that's never happened, and it's never worked that way. And show me the area in the country where gentrification hasn't happened and everyone's living in an affordable unit, and it doesn't exist. And so I am really focused on how do you create the controls and play the proper role of government, the controls, the taxes, the fees that allow the private sector to move forward and make a profit. I'm not against that, but that there's public benefit that is measurable and significant and appropriate based on the needs that we have in the county. And so I think we are in danger, frankly, of leaning way too far on the side of like, hey, we need economic development and we need more housing, all of which are true things, but under that guise of giving the store away and having no control over what we get. And what we're going to get is we're going to get expensive, high cost housing that is going to be for some people, because there are a lot of highly educated people who make money here and they will live in these places. But the question is, what happens to everybody else? And are we ensuring that there is public benefit and affordability and the like for everyone else? And I think that's a core philosophical debate that is happening always in our country and is happening nationally, but right now is happening in Montgomery County. I think most people don't know what's happening. And I think that is something that is of concern, and I think will be something I'll be trying to talk about more. I'm actually doing in January, I think on the 15th, or I don't know when they're going to air it, but I'm doing one of those talks with Dr. Pollard about the, and it's going to be about how do we build back better? How do we come out of this moment in an equitable way? And this will be one of the things I talk about, because I think most people, don't understand what's happening, and they need to be paying attention. And there's not one answer, but people need to be paying attention to it.
Mr. Jawando, that's so insightful. I think I'm going to back up just for a second, and then we'll kind of fast forward to our close tonight. When you mentioned the Thrive Montgomery plan, We actually had someone from the Park and Planning Commission come in and talk to our students. So I think, there are a few of us who do know about what's happening there, but a lot of people don't.
I'm glad you had someone from Thrive 2050. For example, the missing middle housing proposal, if you remember, that's one of the things that they're in favor of, and creating different housing types. And I am in favor of too. I think that's part of the solution. But again, it's about, anyone a Star Wars fan? I don't know. Anyone like Star Wars or Mandalorian? Okay. So there's a line in one of the Star Wars episodes that that Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Anakin as he's turning into Darth Vader. Spoiler alert if I think you knew that. And he says, and Anakin says to him, he says, "You're either with me or you're against me." And he says back to him, he says, "Only Siths deal in absolutes." And it's a reminder that, that we forget in politics. There's, you can have a philosophy and what you think is right, but the right answers are complex and interwoven. And I think, you have to be careful anytime you think you have the absolutely right answer. And I think it's often multiple things that need to happen. And that there are wrong answers. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are wrong answers. I think, tax cuts for the super wealthy and hoping that filters down to economic prosperity for others is not a good answer. But that doesn't mean incentives altogether are a bad answer, for example. And so if they're appropriately targeted and they have for example, one of the things I was able to put in the SSP, the subdivision staging policy, was a 60% discount for developers for their transportation, for their education impact tax, if they build 3-bedroom apartments in densely populated areas. It's a big problem. We don't have a lot of 3 bedrooms being built because they can't charge as much. More people live there, but it's a need for families. And it's an example of a targeted incentive. If the thing happens that we want, it's good for the residents, and it helps give the developer a little incentive. So again, it's just a small example of, be careful about the absolutes.
I really, really thank you for coming in, and I hope that we will be able to see you again. We'll all tune in and watch you with Dr. Pollard when you go in for your one-on-one conversation with her. And thanks again so much to you for joining us, and thank you everybody else for joining us this evening. It's been a really enlightening hour to spend with you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.